Okay. Hello and welcome to my black shoji screen era. I'm probably not keeping it. My name's Sarah, and today we're talking about what people with borderline personality disorder are really like. How do I know what people with BPD are like? Well, for starters, I am one. Sort of. I've been in remission for over 2 years and don't have the diagnostic symptoms anymore, but I did for many years. And now I study the subject thoroughly using information from experts and research, as well as many personal accounts. I interact with a lot of people with BPD online. Borderline personality disorder is better understood now than ever, but there's still a crazy amount of misinformation out there. It comes from some doctors and professionals, literature, the media, people who have experience with people with BPD, and even some who have it themselves. People absorb this misinformation and spread it, the blind leading the blind. But there are a lot of personality traits and characteristics associated with BPD that aren't inherently part of the disorder, and these misconceptions can have really harmful effects. Medical professionals who believe the myths in this video are less likely to diagnose the full range of people with BPD, because they only recognize the ones that fit certain stereotypes. I was misdiagnosed by a handful of doctors for over a decade of my life. Misdiagnosis is especially problematic. Misdiagnosis. That's an awesome name. I'm claiming that, if no one has yet. Misdiagnosis is especially problematic when it keeps patients from getting appropriate and effective treatment, because BPD is very treatable. The sooner you start that treatment, the better. These stereotypes also lead to medical professionals and the general public having a very negative and stigmatized view of people with BPD. That stigma can also be internalized by people with BPD, further negatively affecting their self-view and potentially limiting their growth and recovery potential. I'm going to come back to that towards the end of this video. The point is, it's important to combat these misconceptions. So let's get to it. The first myth is that people with BPD aren't self-aware. The truth is, many people with BPD are painfully self-aware, which adds to the suffering that comes with this condition. I have experienced all 9 of the diagnostic symptoms, and I was very aware of them. I was ashamed of my lack of identity and difficulty in relationships and rapidly fluctuating moods. When I was really triggered and having a breakdown, it could have seemed from the outside like I did lack self-awareness, because who would knowingly act that way? I was even aware of that perception and still couldn't stop myself. This is something that makes borderline personality disorder really difficult. You can act in ways that actively make you feel intense shame and self-loathing, while feeling like you have no control over your emotions and behaviors. Fortunately, that lack of control doesn't have to be permanent. Even though it hurts to deal with painful self-awareness, it often leads people with BPD to seek treatment to work towards understanding and improving themselves. So does this mean all people with BPD are self-aware? Of course not. It can be really hard to honestly look at negative aspects of ourselves and take accountability and believe that we can change. So for some people, it's a defense mechanism not to. But this doesn't apply to all people with BPD, and it applies to plenty of people without it. Myth number 2 is that people with BPD lack empathy. In reality, a lot of people with BPD are the most empathetic people you'll meet. BPD is usually associated with high emotional sensitivity, so we experience emotions very strongly, and that can lead to being more sensitive about other people's emotions. This can actually have negative effects at times, since feeling your own emotions and someone else's so strongly can be overwhelming. It can also lead to people-pleasing and enabling if you have high compassionate empathy and weak boundaries. Or if you have a tendency to mind read, you may have low empathetic accuracy, which is problematic, but we're not going to get into all that for right now. There are people with BPD who generally have low levels of empathy. Again, this is a variable trait for people without BPD as well. But I think this myth often stems from a conditional dysfunction of empathy that can occur in BPD. Big words, I know, but it's a simple concept. When someone's experiencing intense emotion dysregulation, they may temporarily lose some ability to empathize. It can be hard to stay mindful of someone else's emotions when yours are maxed out. And if you're in extreme emotional pain, it can be hard to focus on anything besides your immediate needs. This conditional dysfunction doesn't happen to everyone with BPD, and even when it does, that doesn't mean someone lacks empathy entirely. Hey, are you still paying attention? If you are, can you give this video a like real quick? Thank you. I'll ask again later. Myth number 3 is that people with BPD are manipulative. This is another overgeneralization, just like the other myths. Manipulative behavior is not part of the BPD diagnosis and doesn't apply to everyone. Some people with BPD do use manipulation to try to get their needs met, or avoid abandonment, or hide their negative behaviors. If this applies to you, please don't tell yourself that it's just part of your personality and you can't change. This is learned behavior, and with awareness and conscious effort to change, it can be unlearned. But I think another big reason for this myth is a general misunderstanding of how BPD symptoms work, because some of them can look like manipulation, even if they aren't. Let's look at emotional instability, for example. People with BPD often have high emotional sensitivity paired with poor emotion regulation, meaning they have very strong emotions and difficulty controlling how they express them or react to them. These emotions can also fluctuate rapidly between extremes. I used to occasionally be accused of manipulation when something would really upset me, usually in relationships. They were my biggest trigger. And I'd instantly flip a switch and go from happy and calm to crying and distraught. For someone who doesn't experience this, it can seem like that switching could only happen so rapidly if someone were faking their emotions in an attempt to manipulate. But my emotions were very real, and I was ashamed that I couldn't conceal them better because I knew how it looked. They usually made situations worse, so I was not benefiting from them, but I still couldn't control them. For anyone currently struggling with this, you can learn emotion regulation and improve this symptom. I still have strong emotions, but I don't experience that emotional instability anymore. So again, symptoms may look like manipulative behavior even when they aren't. And this concept is very similar to myth number 4, which is people with BPD are attention-seeking. Some people are. It could be a way that they learn to cope with loneliness or low self-worth. It could be a cry for help, and it can even be unrelated to their BPD. There are plenty of attention seekers without this condition. But again, some symptoms of BPD can seem like attention-seeking behavior, even when they aren't. Going back to emotional instability, if someone has a public outburst, it can look like dramatics for the sake of getting attention. But it may just be a shameful and unwanted reaction caused by difficulty with emotion regulation. BPD does not always care about time and place. Another commonly misunderstood symptom is self-harm and suicidal ideation. I'm not going to talk about these in depth or detail, but they are both often seen as manipulative or attention-seeking behaviors. This misconception is really damaging and dangerous. It can lead to people dismissing and invalidating a serious problem, which can lead to the person with BPD acting out in more extreme ways. And it can make them feel even worse about themselves at an already dark time. Some people hide their symptoms and don't get help because of these negative perceptions. Obviously, that can have really tragic consequences. If you know someone who self-harms or expresses suicidal thoughts, I'm not saying that you're responsible for that or that you have to ignore your own boundaries and needs to try to make them feel better. But approaching the subject with compassion and non-judgment can go a long way. And if you struggle with any of these symptoms yourself, please, please get professional help. You deserve it. Finally, myth number 5 is that people with BPD are abusive and violent. Although people with BPD often struggle to manage their relationships and emotions, violence and abuse are, say it with me, not inherent symptoms of this disorder. Great job. Here's where this comes from. One of the diagnostic symptoms from the DSM-5 is inappropriate, intense anger or difficulty controlling anger. For some, this does translate into violence. But there are many people with BPD who turn that anger inward towards themselves. And there are others who experience anger but can control it. Some people with BPD don't have problems with anger at all. This is why we should be wary of overgeneralizations about borderline personality disorder. Remember, there are 9 symptoms outlined in the DSM-5, and to be diagnosed, you only need 5 of them. So that means you can have 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 in all different combinations. Or you could have all 9. Based on that criteria alone, there are 256 different combinations of symptoms that can make up a BPD diagnosis. There are also various expressions of each of those symptoms, and they can be experienced at different levels of severity. Comorbidities are also common and can vary greatly, and everyone has their own unique experiences, backgrounds, environments, and personalities. BPD exists on a spectrum, and these misconceptions ignore a large part of that spectrum. It's really important that we dispel these myths, because as I said earlier, they don't just affect how others view and define people with BPD. They can also affect how people with BPD view and define themselves. So I want to repeat this once again. If you struggle with any of these traits, please don't tell yourself that it's because of your BPD so you can't change. These traits aren't inherently part of the condition, and they probably aren't part of your core self either. There's a concept in psychology called cognitive dissonance, which occurs when your beliefs and actions aren't in alignment. For example, if you hate being lied to and value honesty, but find yourself being dishonest, you can experience significant shame, anxiety, and mental discomfort. When faced with cognitive dissonance, you can say, "What's wrong with me? I can't stop being this way," or "I hate myself, but I'll never change." Then you stay stuck where you are or spiral even further. Or you can use that discomfort as motivation to change so you can live in alignment with your core values. It takes a lot of honest reflection, understanding, and repeated conscious effort, but it's absolutely possible to change these behaviors, especially if you believe it is. Don't stop believing. That's it for today. Please make sure to subscribe if you want to see more content from me, and please give this video a like if you enjoyed it. That tells me and YouTube that I'm doing a good job. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Peace. Misdiagnosis. Hi, I'm Misdiagnosis. Oh, misdiagnosis.